Alright, I apologize for my hair. I've been wearing a hat all day. Anyway, uh, so this is my own response video to my Second Amendment why I should own a rocket launcher. I went to an extreme in that video, and I did it intentionally. I realize most people might not realize that, some might. Um, but it essentially comes down to this. Uh, I named a legal precedence which justifies the extreme that I went to. Now, there's some other things in there that actually, that the Supreme Court has said that actually reduces that extreme by margins. First of all, you can't just kill a cop for false arrest. You have to be able to show actions taken in bad faith, malicious, and criminal acts. Uh, I can do that in my personal case, and so potentially, yes, I could kill cops. Uh, but I would have to do so in self-defense. I can't just be like, you falsely arrested me, I'm going to kill you now. No, it has to be done at the time of a false arrest. Uh, so I can't go back later on and do it and get away with it. That would be considered murder. Uh, I can't, you know, uh, I can't harm them after they stand down from attempting a false arrest. Now think about this. If the police come to your house and are there to falsely arrest you, and you point this out to them, and you tell them to get the fuck off your property, and they say, well, we're going to take you in, and you pull a gun on them and say you have two choices. You can leave here, or you can stay where you're at. But if you're going to stay where you're at, you're going to be, feeding the buzzards on my front lawn. They walk away. If they come back and try to falsely arrest you, yes, you can shoot them. But in that instance, when they're walking away, when they're retreating, when they're removing themselves from the attempted false arrest, you can't do anything. This is one of the things why I said it was a stand down issue in the other video, because if you try to enact a false or illegal law, or a law that you know to be false and illegal, which violates the law itself of this country, and the very Constitution, which establishes the republic and the framework of the government of this country, then you're criminally responsible. Someone can kill you. A lot of people will, and they can potentially get away with it. Yeah, they'll go to prison and they'll lose years of their life fighting it in court, but then they'll appeal it. And what happens is when they appeal it, then they sue, and the government has to pay out to them for each and every individual case. And then there's people who lose lives, and there's people who die, and there's people who get shot in the crossfire, and it's just a whole nasty affair. But I wanted to point that out because this is essentially what we're looking at, okay? We need to be realistic and rational. But realistic and rational does mean that you have to understand the extreme. Okay, what I presented was the extreme definition. The extreme that it can be taken to as far as it can go. Now, that doesn't mean I can just walk out here and shoot anybody willy-nilly. That's not my Second Amendment right. It means I have a right to defend myself, even against the government. And it gets really interesting because when you start talking about the government, people automatically assume, NWO, David Icke's shape-shifting lizard aliens from the fourth dimension of his basement or wherever the fuck he's at. You get all these crazy notions based on conspiracy theories and movies and everything else. But the reality of the matter is, it doesn't protect me against rogue government and tyranny. I mean, it does, but it also protects me against corruption. You've ever seen those movies where organized crime had like dirty cops, and the dirty cops would kill people under the presumed jurisdiction of abiding by the law? Hey, that wasn't a Judge Dredd movie, wasn't it? Yeah, it was. And in that case, even though it was a fictional account, if that were to happen in America, under those guidelines and those restrictions and under the Constitution as we now have it, people could defend themselves and kill those officers or those judges from the movie. But we're talking about a fictional movie. In real life, it's the same thing. That's the point of me pointing to the fact that we're talking about, bringing up court cases. That is the whole point of Bad Elk versus the U.S. Bad Elk himself was a police officer. 3 police officers came to his house to effect an arrest without a warrant. Now, I'm not saying that they didn't have the warrant in hand. I'm saying they had no warrant. It did not exist. They did not go to a magistrate or a judge or wherever they go to get their warrants on an Indian reservation, I don't know, and say, we need a warrant for this person. They never did that. Instead, what they did was they were told by the chief of the reservation police to go arrest Mr. Bad Elk and bring him in. And Mr. Bad Elk said, no. I'll come in a couple of days when I feel like it, but I got things to do. Bye. Leave. You're trespassing. They then attempted to forcibly arrest him, and a fight ensued. Someone drew a gun. He drew a gun. He fired. That person died. He was later arrested for killing a police officer and in the course of resisting arrest. And then it came out that the arrest wasn't even legal to begin with, and he had to take this case all the way to the U.S. Supreme Court. And so what we're talking about here is that there are common law frameworks, and once it hits the U.S. Supreme Court, it blankets all districts. See, I'm in the 4th district, I believe, or the 9th. I'm in whatever district I'm in over here in West Virginia, or Southern West Virginia. And there's another district for Northern West Virginia. And so a person south of Charleston has a different common law standard from the federal courts than a person north of Charleston in that different district. However, if it hits the U.S. Supreme Court, then what happens is it blankets all districts. So it applies to cases in federal appeals courts that go all the way out to California. This is the reason why a lot of these states enacted more favorable self-defense laws, because there was already a common law standard established by the Supreme Court and multiple other lesser federal appeals courts, which established the individual has a right to defend themselves, that prior threats of violence can be used to as a basis for feeling the need to use lethal force, that you have the right to resist an unlawful arrest. All of these things have already been established by the Supreme Court, and they blanket every other court in the U.S. The difference is, in America, or in West Virginia, Article 1 of our state constitution, because it was formed out of the Civil War, says that the laws and treaties of the United States shall be the supreme law of the land in West Virginia. What that means is that the state court is subservient to the federal courts. And it doesn't even matter, because even when you're talking about moving something from a state appeals court to a federal appeals court, that federal appeals court is under the guidance of the Supreme Court, which changes the whole thing. And a lot of states have had issues with people who have been imprisoned for defending themselves, and then later appealing it after 10 years or 8 years or 5 years or whatever. And when it hit federal court, the federal appeals court flipped it back and said, nope, it's appealed. And this was before it even had to go to the stage of the Supreme Court, because these previous cases have already been ruled by the Supreme Court. So I wanted to mention that extreme, because I wanted to put a conscious framework on this. I'm not talking about, Obama becoming Adolf Hitler. I'm not talking about Obama becoming Mao. I'm not talking about that extreme. It's a possibility. We don't know what the future holds. I'm not going to say yay or nay to any of it. However, the fact is that we have the ability to defend ourselves legally and in court. That's why I specifically said on there that, I would be more than happy to take it to the Supreme Court. I would love for some little bullshit little small town cop down here to get offended by that and take me to court, because if it requires me going to the Supreme Court because this little asshole thinks he wants to run me through jail and everything else, I've already lost 7 years of my life. The bullshit made up small town fucking false charges and who's related to what and everything else. I really don't give a fuck. I mean, to be honest, I've been ready to pick up a gun and kill these assholes years ago. The only reason I haven't done it is because it doesn't serve a purpose. Either way, I end up losing all of my life. It's better for me to play nice and use the system and try to preserve what bit of my life has been left to me than to try to murder the assholes and feel better about myself, but becoming a terrorist, insurgent, outlaw, criminal, whatever. I don't want to do that. And I don't want to go too far out in the left field with this, and I want to make this video kind of short. So I want to explain the framework of why I did it. Because, see, me justifying that need for that rocket launcher and that need to defend myself against the government also applies to people who are in the government who abuse their power. Just like in the case of Bad Elk versus the U.S., where a reservation police chief told reservation police officers to go bring in Mr. John Bad Elk with no warrant. There was no court of law that said you can physically apprehend this person and take him into custody and bring him before whoever. It was simply, the chief decided. Much like the chief decided in New Orleans to go confiscating guns. Now, it's a good thing I don't live in New Orleans because I would have killed the cops. I probably would have killed the National Guard that came after them. And there would have been a whole lot of death, and I probably would have ended up dead or in prison or whatever, and my entire defense to this would have been nothing other than, going back to Bad Elk versus U.S. and the same legal precedents I named previously in my previous video. And could you imagine not only having this, the mayor and the chief of police trying to claim responsibility for not just taking stolen property from people against their rights and against, the framework of the law, since the mayor actually can't declare a national state or a state of emergency. It has to be the governor of the state. And he can't declare martial law in his city or anything else. It requires the governor, if not the governor, the president, and trying to explain while, there's 5, 6, 10, 15, 12 dead police officers floating around in a flooded city because they tried to take guns away from someone who refused to surrender. See, and to be honest, I probably wouldn't have that attitude if I hadn't gone through all the legal bullshit I've gone through in the last few years. But it essentially just breaks down to it as this, you got to draw your line in the sand somewhere. The idea of explaining it to that extreme, to putting it out there in that extreme, is both to shock you and to educate you. See, like I've said this many times, I'm all for saber rattling. Because hopefully if I can rattle that saber and you realize that it's there, you're not going to, force me into that corner to pull it. Nobody wants a war. Nobody wants to see America ripped apart by civil war. That would be stupid. But at the same time, we do not want to have our right to defend ourselves against criminals who hide behind the authority of the government. And again, I'm not accusing Obama of being Hitler or anything else. I'm simply saying that you have criminals who join the police force, criminals who become lawyers and everything else, so that, they can have a way to get away with their crime. And that if you allow me not to be protected by those criminals, and I'm not protected against the criminals on the street, then essentially, what's the point? You're essentially making me a slave. Where you can just come in and grab me up and say, hey, we think whatever, and so we're going to lock you up. And then, you really don't need to worry about the NDAA thing, because that's another issue in and of itself. If you can arrest me without a warrant, if you can abduct me from my home and send me to Guantanamo Bay without a warrant, without a trial, then what happens is, how do I defend that? I can't petition the government for redress of grievance. I can't file an appeal. I can't file a habeas corpus. None of this stuff, because you've already denied me that by having this NDAA thing. That leaves only one option, which is to pick up a gun and defend myself. And then you have to explain how come there are dead people with no warrant. And that's another issue to it, because Bad Elk versus the U.S. completely nullifies the notion of the NDAA, or the National Defense Authorization Act. It completely nullifies it, which is another reason I brought up that legal case. And so, it becomes to an issue that when you really want to break down to it, am I afraid of my government? Yes. Am I afraid that they're going to send jackbooted thugs to my door to abduct me and throw a black bag over my face, like in the movie V for Vendetta, and cart me off to somewhere where they're going to shoot me behind the chemical shed? You bet. And, I wouldn't be afraid of that happening if they hadn't passed those laws allowing them to do so, which are a direct violation of Supreme Court rulings and the Constitution. But we have to be afraid of, these terrorists half a world away. And, to risk sounding like a conspiracy nut, it doesn't seem plausible or sane to have to be afraid of people half a world away from me when my government is doing things which makes me afraid of them right here at home. It doesn't seem plausible or sane to have to be afraid of people half a world away from me when my government is doing things which makes me afraid of them right here at home. It doesn't seem plausible or sane to have to be afraid of people half a world away from me when my government is doing things which makes me afraid of them right here at home.